This is an exclusive presentation of the Foreign Press Association.
Okay, well, I am, for my many, many sins, I've got so many of them, president of the Foreign Press Association. But in my previous incarnation, I was a founder member of the Caribbean Media Exchange on Sustainable Tourism, which was set up in the aftermath of 9/11, which was another catastrophic blow to the Caribbean economy. And that was when many Caribbean economies, for the first time, really noticed that they had huge ministries of agriculture because there was one banana plantation left or one sugar plantation left. But in fact, the mainstay of the Caribbean economies has been tourism. It's been the money that tourists and visitors bring in with them. And at the moment, of course, as soon as I saw the implications that the airlines were stopped flying down there, that the cruise ships had stopped calling, this meant that those dollars weren't going. And I know just how fragile some of those economies have been. So it seemed natural to call upon Frank with his expertise, representing not the big chains, although he represents them as well, but many, many of the Caribbean hotels and the tourist business is the original small business that everyone tells us is the bedrock of economic growth. And at the moment, that growth has got to be stunted, hasn't it, Frank? What's the prognosis so far?
Well, I think it's, thank you for inviting us to participate, Ian and Jonathan. The prognosis is the same as it is for any areas that's been impacted. We don't know. We know it's going to be tough. We know it's going to be a while before we get out of it. And we're just doing everything we can do from a contingency planning point of view, as well as from a readiness perspective. What do we need to be doing now to be ready to come back as well? But it's a very precarious situation. And as you know, the preponderance of tourism in our economies throughout the region, it's a major challenge for both the public and private sectors.
But is there any safety net? One of the things I saw the UN, the Economic Commission for the Caribbean and Latin America, was talking about 10% unemployment, and I can't help thinking that's likely to be an underestimate. How much resilience is there? Can these countries afford to pay the unemployed? Can they afford a multi-trillion-dollar bailout package?
That's a challenge that every country is going through in the Caribbean right now. They were already, some of them were in a very vulnerable situation with debt to GDP being above a precarious level, and we expect that this is going to make it more difficult for them. There are efforts going on right now with the governments, in some cases with the private sector in some destinations, to come up with strategies. They're in discussions as well with the multilaterals, international bodies as well, to see what types of support and relief can be had. But it's going to take a bit of effort. Now, one thing we do know, which is an area of encouragement, is historically we know that we're a pretty darn resilient sector, and we've looked at 20-year patterns from 9/11 to Zika to several hurricanes to chikungunya. I mean, you name it. We've been through, quite a few circumstances. Volcanoes, earthquakes, and so on. And the data clearly shows, and we know as an industry, that we bounce back. We bounce back better. We bounce back stronger. And there's no reason to believe, even though we're looking at a magnitude of situation that we've never experienced before, but there's no reason to believe that we won't be resilient once again. There will be casualties. There's no doubt about that. But we will be resilient. And there's no better place for the world to recover and heal than the Caribbean.
Well, book my recovery beach chair at some point soon, but not just yet. Because one of the questions has got to be, with all of these visitors coming from across the world, what is the effect of the virus, of the infectivity on Caribbean populations, on islands that, have, let's say, mixed and probably inadequate medical facilities for something on this score?
Well, that remains to be seen yet. But what I can tell you is that the Caribbean took this very seriously back in January. Actually, we mobilized our resources in January. We have a partnership as a hotel and tourism association.
Before Washington, may I add?
What's that?
Before Washington, it seems. Well done.
I do believe we can quantify that. But we've had a partnership for about 5 years. The Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association and our public sector counterpart called the Caribbean Tourism Organization, with an organization, a regional body called the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA. And with that, we've been working on a number of mitigation and training types of initiatives and monitoring initiatives with CARFA. We've created online tools for monitoring health and safety types of situations. And we have a number of hotels, several hundred hotels that are part of that in destinations. And immediately in January, I guess the third week in January, we reached out, we had discussions, and we convened, and we started training right away. We put in place on February 4th, we had a webinar with over 400 hotel and tourism related representatives on understanding the virus, understanding the potential threat, and also reigniting and activating our online confidential monitoring system, which every hotel that signs into that can basically assess what's going on. If they suspect a situation, they're seeing symptoms from an employee or a visitor, they basically are able to immediately indicate what's going on through this monitoring system, and then receive feedback immediately, both from the regional health authorities as well as the local health authorities, to help to find out what's going on, and if it's a situation, to mitigate it as well. So between that, a number of awareness initiatives, the government's mobilized very early in the Caribbean as well. We're hoping that we were able to stem the extent to which we're going to be impacted. We are already being impacted, obviously. But the incidence of reported cases in the region, I mean, we have them in just about every destination. We represent 33 destinations in the Caribbean. It's there, but it's low. And because they are islands, many of the destinations, they're able to contain a lot better than what you could do, say, in the States, where it's just wide open. So they can contain, some of them took a lot of heat for containing, for not allowing for cruise ships to come into their destinations early on, before the whole thing was even a threat globally. And also in recent weeks, they have been putting up travel advisories from high incident destinations and other areas. And today, most of the Caribbean is in lockdown. So airports and seaports, managed, contained. Hopefully that gets us through this better than many areas.
You touched on a subject there. There were calls, of course, for the cruise liners to get federal aid, until somebody pointed out that the cruise liners don't pay federal taxes ever because of their offshore capability. And I gather that disappeared out the bill in the face of logic and possibly popular indignation. But the standing up to the cruise lines has been difficult for destinations. So it was actually very heartening when you saw governments saying, no, you can't come in, because that's a sign of strength in the face of a very powerful lobby. And
there was a lot of pushback. Some of our leaders took a bit of a browbeating from the industry, from the cruise industry, because of that. But they held firm, and not all of the destinations, but a number of them did. And as a consequence, I would venture to say that we've minimized the threat level to some degree because of that.
But I mean, what happens afterwards? Are the countries concerned trying to make sure there's no retaliation from the cruise lines, for example?
That remains to be seen. I do believe from a an appeal, as well as I wouldn't even venture to say what they're going to go through.
Marshy ground here. I'm sorry.
That whole industry is going to go through some incredible challenges, similar but also different than what we're going through on the accommodation side, the overnight accommodation side. So I think it's a lesson for us as well, and we'll see to what extent there's the collective will to address some of the things that from our association's point of view need to be addressed from an equity and good player type of point of view with the cruise sector. They do a lot of wonderful things. They're incredibly savvy business people, but the consensus in the destinations and within our organization is that they need to be better players.
From my experience of the Caribbean, I mean, many of the hotels they're good social citizens. That they, they're involved in environmental projects. They're involved in charities. They help in education. They help in development.
Environmental matters. I mean, all of that. So yeah, there is a lot of goodwill by many in our industry. A lot of them are undergoing quite a bit of anguish right now, because some are in a situation where they can help with their employees who are being temporarily furloughed. Others just don't have the capacity to do that. There are discussions going on in a number of the governments between the public and private sector with the tourism industry as part of those discussions to determine what can be done to address a number of these challenges now and operationally, types of relief, not dissimilar to some of the kinds of things we're hearing in the U.S. But again, to your point earlier, Ian, most of our destinations in the Caribbean do not have the wherewithal financial wherewithal as from a government point of view to address the incredible challenges this is going to present to all of us. And that's why all the more reason, as we can pull out of this, history shows us that tourism is a way to pull us out of this. Now, we've got to obviously have the airlift. We've got to have consumer confidence return as well. So how long that takes is an unknown. None of us know that. But we've got to be ready to be able to recapture market share when we get over this. And there's a lot of resolve to do that. Public and
I'm not sure whether they're your members, but there's some very extra vulnerable politically and socially, Cuba and Haiti, for example.
Yeah, Haiti's part of our federation. Yeah, Cuba is not, but we do have discussions with them at certain levels.
So how are they affected by it so far?
Well, Haiti's just, as you know, it's just a very unfortunate situation. It's one situation after another that affects them. I think it's going to be difficult for them to get through this, but and we'll be there the best we can to be able to help. We're doing a lot of plans right now on training, awareness, readiness kinds of things. How do you get through this operationally? What are some of the decisions that you need to make? Best practice sharing. So we've been doing some webinars, and we're accelerating that quite a bit right now as well. So destinations are going to go through this at varying levels depending on where they're at, it will present a challenge for Haiti in particular.
Well, and it's not a member of yours, but Cuba, for example, it cocked a snook at the rest of the world in the region by allowing a cruise ship to transship British passengers for an airlift. Yeah. They got a great deal of credit for it. Yeah. So where do they come out of this?
Cuba, I have no idea. I mean, we do not get the kind of data that we need from Cuba regionally to be able to do assessments. They were having a difficult year and a half, 2 years since the U.S. sanctions were reinstated, and so we were seeing on the arrival side, we were seeing some challenges that they were facing, I think it's going to continue to be a challenge for them, particularly with the sanctions in place.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned how many of your members how many of the islands that you represent have actual, say, unemployment benefits if the hotels can't afford to pay their staff?
We don't know I don't know the exact number offhand, but a number of them do have something called something similar to what's called national insurance, the national insurance kind of program, and some of those kinds of programs have an element, but it's nowhere near what you're talking about in the States. I mean, those are at a much lower level, and that's why, I mean, it's in our interest to try to get back as quickly as we can, but we can't compromise the health and safety of our people as well as our visitors in that process. So those are tough decisions. Some hotels are doing some outstanding things. One hotel in particular, a small hotel, has basically set aside $500,000 US to be able to just help their employees, but they figure that's only going to go a month or two. So what happens after that? That's where community spirit really has to come in, and those that can are helping right now. But how long that pipeline of support can last is a question none of us know at this point.
Is there any possibility that some of the hotels might be either volunteered or confiscated, not commandeered for hospital accommodation as it goes? Is that?
There are several discussions, and I'm not quite sure how they progressed, but I was aware about a week ago of several discussions in several destinations where some properties were being considered as quarantine types of areas as well. So I think that's going to be more on a destination by destination basis. It's nothing that's been collaboratively advanced at the CARICOM level or in a broader way. But there are some destinations that have looked at that.
Apart from the locals, what's the position of visitors who have been trapped there by the virus and the cessation of flights?
Well, I saw one visitor in the Bahamas standing on a beach holding up a sign that basically said, "I'm fine staying in the Bahamas." So
did he have a bottle of rum in his hand by any chance?
Yes, I think he had your book on rum in there with him as well. But a lot of them have been evacuated. There have been some extra flights that have come in as well, particularly this week to help with evacuation. They've been encouraged to leave. And I think we've seen a good deal of that happen. I don't think there's a large population left of visitors in the destinations, unless they're snowbirds or they own a timeshare or something like that. But by and large, we're expecting by next week that hotel suspensions of operations will be affecting in excess of 90% of the hotels in the Caribbean.
On the other point is about the supply chains. I mean, has the virus these are islands. They import a tremendous amount of stuff. Not many have an adequate local food base. Is there any disruption in those supply chains? Because
right. Well, that's outside of my bailiwick, but at the same time, we do know that destinations have anywhere from a month to 3 months of inventory of supplies in that regard. It's also, unless I've missed something, the travel advisories have not applied to cargo. So supplies are still getting in. Then you have destinations like Jamaica and the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico to an extent that are more self-sufficient than others. So you're seeing, we'll see some of that, but we're hoping that we're looking, 4 to 6 weeks where we can begin to let up on some of this, obviously with a lot of provisions of social distancing and other kinds of things in place. And we can start seeing some sun. Well, the sun's always shining on the Caribbean, but some sunshine, we'll see hopefully at least another 4 to 5 months of some minimal or certainly subsided threat. Again, listening to the experts, there's a chance of a cyclical kind of thing with this, and we've got to be prepared for that as well. And that's why the whole issue of changing behaviors operationally at the hotels and tourism-related businesses, at the ports of entry, with our population, at restaurants and so on, we're putting a lot of focus on those kinds of behaviors. There's efforts going on in destinations with the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center based out of Jamaica, with ourselves in creating social messaging as well and getting that out to the population, making the population aware that we can control aspects of this. We can control aspects of this through our behaviors, and we're trying to enhance that kind of awareness. A lot of our focus earlier had been on within hotels and within the industry, doing a lot of the training and awareness and tools. We have a resource center as well on our website, the CaribbeanHotelAndTourism.com/COVID-19. It's a resource center that has a lot of training tools, up-to-date information, the travel advisories. We established a cancellation guidelines for hotels about 3 weeks ago in the region to basically give them some minimal guidance on how to handle those kinds of things. And we have cancellation guidelines, links to airlift, airline status and so on our resource center, as well as training tools, guides, posters, videos, all that kind of stuff that people can tap into. Very little bit that we've originated ourselves. Most of it's experts types of information and resources that are out there from WHO, the WTTC, the Caribbean Public Health Agency, and US CDC, and the experts basically, but very tourism focused, very tourism centric, as we culled all the information that's out there to put it together on our resource center site.
Allegedly, Confucius said, but it's on the lines of Abraham Lincoln said, you should never believe what you read on the internet, that crisis presents opportunity.
Absolutely.
So is there an opportunity here? I mean, are the hotels trying to seize the downtime to rehabilitate, to retool, to...
Ian, you're spot on. And I think the guy who said that was from the Wuhan province as well. So
probably, yes.
But no, we've subscribed to that all along. In fact, I remember I was in Grenada about 2 weeks, 3 weeks after Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit. Now, Grenada was not affected by Irma Maria, but I was having dinner with half a dozen hoteliers, including Sir Royston Hopkin, who was like our godfather for the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism. God bless his soul, he passed away about a month ago. But when we were having dinner, I said to them, we were discussing Irma and Maria and how it impacted 6 or 7 of the destinations in the Eastern Caribbean. And they had been devastated, Grenada, in 2004 by Hurricane Ivan.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them 3 years after Hurricane Ivan, what was your industry like in Grenada? And every one of them said, without a heartbeat, basically said, better. We built better. We rebuilt better. We've changed our operations. We made ourselves much more operationally efficient. We came back, upgraded our properties. We got a higher rate. We focused on training and service and training our personnel, and it was the best thing that could have ever happened to them. Now, that's what they told me.
Well, I saw the pictures, so I'm sure they all got new roofs out of it at least.
Yeah, right.
Sorry, being sardonic about it. So,
but we've seen the same thing since 2017. In 2017, when the hurricanes hit the major destinations in some of them in the Eastern Caribbean, Northeastern Caribbean, we basically, working with the World Travel and Tourism Council and Oxford Economics, we basically, they said, how can we help? We said, you can help us do some research because we need some baseline research on recovery and what are the kinds of things that need to impact recovery and what are some of the lessons that we can learn from other areas in terms of our ability to recover and bounce back faster. WTTC did an analysis. They commissioned Tourism Economics, Oxford Economics, part of the same family, to do an analysis. We worked with them, and basically the report came out and it basically said that we will bounce back based on their experiences in looking at SARS and other tsunamis and other kinds of incidents on tourism, that we will come back, but it's likely going to take 4 years to come back and be at the same level you were at before. Well, we've monitored, we've trained, we've supported, I mean, all of us at the destination level as well as at our level with the public and private sectors as well, helping them to bounce back. And 2.5 years later, most of them had bounced back to the level that they were at before the recovery. Their products were better. They had upgraded their products. They had improved them, and it was just in retrospect, despite the incredible challenges, it was also a godsend as well. So to your point, crisis presents opportunity, Ian, absolutely. And I think it was Prime Minister Motley out of Barbados just about a week ago said in her address to the nation something to the effect of a crisis is a bad thing. A good crisis is a bad thing to waste.
Not bad. Well, I've got one sort of parting question before we throw it open, and it's, once again, it's an unfair, tricksy one. I mean, the hotels, yes, I will be going back to the Caribbean. Yes, I will be going back to the beaches. Yes, I will be going back to the rum shacks. But it would take a lot to tempt me to go on a cruise ship after the scenes we've seen of people entombed in a windowless cabin for weeks in quarantine. Yeah. And with the rapidity of the spread in there, do you think this is going to have a lasting effect on the cruise industry?
I think, it is, they are so savvy at what they do. I think it's going to have an interim effect. I think it may last 2 years or so for them, a little bit longer than it would for the other areas. But I think they can rebuild consumer confidence. To be honest with you, I was surprised how rapidly this spread within the cruise industry. I think it took them by surprise. They have taken very seriously the norovirus threat. I think that was a wake-up call for them a number of years ago, and they put a number of training and other kinds of passenger protocols and how they treat their buffet lines and all that kind of stuff in play. But this thing blindsided them. I don't think they were ready for it, and unfortunately, they've taken a huge PR hit on it as well. It's going to take them time, but I think they will rebuild consumer confidence. I think they're probably right now assessing how they do business in the future and how they can do it better. I also personally hope it's a bit of a wake-up call for them that they need to be more of a player with other stakeholders. What we've seen that they've done, and I'm not saying it's a corporate, intentionally corporately, but it happens too regularly with the environmental dumping, with the extrapolation of revenue out of a destination without putting sufficient revenue back into the destination in terms of how they compete with our attractions and our retail and all of that. They've had a major detrimental impact. They'll argue the positive part of it, but they've also have had a detrimental impact as well.
They don't want their passengers spending money with other people if they can avoid it.
The revenue to be retained as much as possible within the ship. Their fees are far, far lower than they are for the hotel and tourism industry. They don't have the regulatory kinds of requirements for wage laws and health and safety and all of that our hotels and other tourism stakeholders, land-based stakeholders have to deal with. So I think they're going to go through a major assessment, and I think they're going to get a lot of international pressure as well from governments, as well as from groups like ours, to be a better player. And they do wonderful things post a disaster situation. They are the first in there. They help the destinations to rebound. They give generously in that regard. But on a day-to-day operational level, they are not the players they need to be in our industry and with our regions.
I think it was a sign of the times when the cap that they held out in Washington this week was returned pretty much empty. But
I hope for the best, because I think the consumers, just as much as the consumers want to participate in Airbnb types of accommodations and some in timeshares, some in traditional hotels, some in all-inclusive hotels. It's a market. It's what people want. They want choices. They want opportunities. Different people want to do different types of experiences, and the cruise is all part of that. And they do benefit in terms of the spend and all of that. We just want them to be, we just want the destinations and the governments and the communities to benefit more from what they do, and not to be damaged by some of the things that they don't do, or they do carelessly.
All right, I think we're getting to the point where has anybody got any questions out there, either in person or to type it up on the message panel?
We have a few actually from.
Okay, shoot, John.
Okay, so we have one that have infections spread in the Caribbean. What does the curve look like?
They have spread to the Caribbean, and I think just about every destination. There might be one or two that have not had reported cases yet. They are, like I said earlier in the session, they are not pervasive to our awareness yet. In part, I think because of the controls that have been happening at borders. They've been in place in many of the destinations, not all of them, but many of the destinations for a month. So hopefully we've contained it or minimized it, but we will see an increase in it. And that's why there's so much of an emphasis right now locally on the PR, locally on social distancing and things like that. And we just hope for the best. I mean, I'm hoping we're not the last of the wave of, as we've seen it from the Far East to Europe, to the United States. Now we're starting to see it in the Southern Hemisphere, starting to emerge there. But when you look at it, I mean, we're not as pervasive as we've seen elsewhere, and hopefully with the border measures that have been put in place this week, just about every destination is locked down in the Caribbean, and some of them have been locked down for a week. So hopefully, and they've been monitoring arrivals from every threatened area for 6-8 weeks in some cases, they get manifest. So they're able to see where a passenger is coming from, and protocols were put in place back in early February for how to monitor this. So the immigration authorities were brought in, and all of that happened early on. So whether or not that insulates us from the intensity of this remains to be seen. We're hoping.
There's a question on that actually that was asked. Were the islands better prepared due to contingency plans in place because of weather events?
Well, and that's a great question, because the Caribbean is, and I say this knocking on some wood here, but the Caribbean is generally better prepared for disasters than I would venture to say any other part of the world. I personally, I'm a Bahamian resident as well, and as an American resident and citizen, I've lived almost my entire life in the Caribbean, and I've been through 16 significant hurricanes. I've been the co-chair for the Bahamas for 10 years for their equivalent of FEMA, or we called it the NEMA in the Bahamas. I was the co-chair for the tourism task force on that for 10 years on readiness and response, not only for hurricanes, but every type of crisis situation. We have similar entities that have existed throughout the region for many years, public-private sector. So we're pretty skilled at these kinds of things, crisis management and mitigation and recovery. And I expect we're going to see all of that experience. We're seeing it right now, and hoping it'll come into play as we try to climb ourselves out of this as well.
I couldn't help thinking that the Caribbean mightn't have walls, but it's got one hell of a moat, so it helps.
Exactly. I mean, there's some advantage to that insulation as well. Our natural borders.
Jonathan,
so
go ahead.
We have another question. What message do you have for international visitors at this time?
Is this the time to book early for Christmas?
Well, interesting. I just saw some data yesterday. While our cancellations and our bookings our cancellations are all off the charts, and our advanced bookings 30 and 60 days out are 30 days out is virtually nothing. 60 days out, we're seeing a little bit of a bump in advanced bookings, but nowhere near where we would be at normal times. But our advanced bookings 90 days out are actually showing, some signs of some good signs. I mean, they're up slightly, and we were really surprised to see that this morning in a presentation by one of our partners, Adara. So that's
the future market is betting on a 90-day time cycle for this.
Right. And then the other thing is, I mean, keep this in mind. I mean, a lot of our people who were scheduled to come to the Caribbean in March, April, and May, because our policies, most of our hotels have put in policies to allow them to postpone it without any penalty and reschedule it for, in some cases, they're allowing them to reschedule it up to a year without any change in the pricing and no penalties. Those people are going to come back. So we do expect when confidence returns, Ian, and your confidence will return, even though you won't want to come on a cruise ship. When you sense that you could get on a plane, you might be a little distance on the plane. Their load factors might be different, but and you'll be spread out a little bit differently. But when you can come on a plane and come on down here and escape the insanity of what you're going through right now, it's going to be one of the best things for your health, your mental, emotional, and spiritual health. There's no place like the Caribbean to just take all of that away. I love the family islands in the Bahamas. I actually have property in Abaco, which wasn't impacted by Hurricane Dorian, but as soon as you get off a plane in the family islands in the Bahamas, your sense of peace is overwhelming, and it just happens naturally. And that's the case for many of our destinations. You've been throughout the Caribbean. You know the feeling that I'm talking about.
I remember after 9/11, the slogan that came up with, I think it was Butch Stewart in Jamaica.
What was it?
Life needs the Caribbean.
Life needs the Caribbean. And by the way, we're noodling around how we put a spin on that for 2000.
Sure you would.
2000 as well. So and we have also another slogan with one of our campaigns that we did post 2017 on the hurricanes called "The Caribbean, the Rhythm Never Stops." So we think we're well positioned. We know there's going to be a lot of pain and hardship in the interim. We're hoping that can be mitigated, and as we get through this, the world will need the Caribbean as well.
Knowing the Caribbean, and the media there are not shy of attacking their governments for assumed or real faults. Well, what's the Caribbean media response been like so far in terms of holding governments' feet to the fire over responses?
Well, and it's really a difficult situation because we have a number of destinations that are having elections this year, much like the U.S. If someone says something that's critical, it's interpreted right away as being a political kind of statement. So we're seeing a little bit of that, but I also think that people are realizing the magnitude of this, and it requires a higher level of thinking. I've seen a little bit of it. It's disappointing to see that, but at the same time, there has to be some level of accountability as well, and the media plays a critical role in that.
Feet to the fire, as I always say.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
We have a question from David Michaels. Do your members have sufficient supply of test kits and support medical equipment?
Our members, hotels themselves, they all have, they're required by law to have not necessarily test kits for this, but that certainly wouldn't exist. But they have health kits and those kinds of things. But to answer your question accurately, I do not think there's anything out there with a hotel in terms of mass supplies of masks or
respirators on the island.
But that being said, I mean, you see a lot of hand sanitizer types of situations and so on throughout hotels. They have been posting messages to guests and advice to guests on how to handle things, as well as training to employees and so on. So, but in terms of mass supplies to help like you would in a hospital situation or something like that, I would venture to say that that's not prevalent.
We have another question. Are there questions reporters should be asking that they aren't right now?
Wow, that's actually a gift of a question, but I'm not quite sure what to answer.
How wonderful are you?
Huh? Was that?
How wonderful are you, Mr. Comito? I think this is the
right.
question you're looking
That's
for.
Right. No, I mean, you're asking questions about how we're going to handle recovery and those kinds of things. Those are all good. Why the Caribbean versus other areas? When people are ready to travel again, I mean, I could espouse on that kind of thing if they'd like, but
we actually got that very question, which was about which are some islands better poised for a faster recovery than others.
What was that? Could you repeat that?
Yes.
John?
Are some islands better poised for a faster recovery than others?
I think so. It's going to depend on the extent to which they have contamination. Some of them have incredibly strong recovery programs already established. Some of them are being smart and working on marketing and public relations strategies right now. Those that are working on that right now are going to be ready before others, and I think they'll bounce back faster. I don't want to get in a situation of naming countries because we represent all of them, and I don't necessarily have the facts on all of them. There are those, in my view, that will bounce back faster, but I think the due diligence will be on the consumer as well to do their research as they're looking at options of places to go and get a sense of how well they've done on recovery. There's a lot of stuff out there, obviously on social and other sources. It's wading through it to see what's fact and what's not. But I think the best thing the consumer can do when they're looking at options, and now's a great time to fantasize escaping, is to do your online research. And as you get closer to making a travel decision, look at what the travelers are saying, look at what policies are in place by the destination, and so on. A lot of that's out there right now, and there's some research that the consumer would need to do.
One of the things about the Caribbean, of course, is it's got a very large diaspora, expatriate workers, and I mean, the economy is, apart from tourism, many of the economies are, I wouldn't say not necessarily dependent, but thankful for large remittances from the host countries that the immigrants have gone to.
Right.
What's the factor here? Because I'd imagine there'd be a big sort of splurge as lots of expatriates who've been cut off suddenly as soon as they think it's safe, they want to rush home and check everyone's okay and bring money with them.
Yeah, no, and you're going to see that, and that's a type of tourism that we welcome. Often they don't stay in hotels; they stay with family and friends, but they spend, and like you said, they bring money. They're going to want to help when they come back, so that will happen. That's natural. That will happen. Here's a question. Here's a tough question that you could ask me.
Tough questions are us. Go on then.
How can governments justify, in the Caribbean, justify providing support and relief to help rebound tourism when their population has so many needs as well on a recovery? You guys want to try to answer that? No.
Okay. Okay. You ask, you answer. It's
and that's a tough decision for governments to make. I think it was good to hear that, Ian, that you were part of the founding of CEMEX, because I remember when it was founded, one of your first conferences was in Nassau in the Bahamas when I was there. And we worked with Bevan on that a little bit. And that whole initiative really from CEMEX with the media really jump-started an awareness initiative that spread throughout the Caribbean, and today has really been incredibly helpful in our governments and more of our people understanding the pervasive impact and value and importance of tourism as a socioeconomic development tool.
I remember what we intended to do, and I think we succeeded, was to get local tourism coverage from the back business pages to the front pages of the newspapers.
Absolutely.
Everybody.
And it was very important because our population, by and large, and many of our government leaders 20 years ago did not understand what tourism meant to them. They didn't understand that when a dollar came into an economy from a tourist, that's anywhere up to 90 cents of that. In most destinations, it's 40 or 50 cents of it in the Caribbean, circulated throughout the Caribbean and touched everything. It generated an equivalent amount of tax revenue that helps to build schools, to provide services, health, safety, parks, recreation, whatever it be. As that dollar circulates throughout the economy, it touches everybody. And from that, we started working as well with the World Travel and Tourism Council and the UNWTO, United Nations World Tourism Organization, who established something called tourism satellite accounts to help governments understand how that dollar impacts the entire economy and the tax revenues of governments, as well as employment. The multiplier on that, not just the direct, it's the multiplier on it. So as governments have begun to understand that, and I think Jamaica has done a terrific job of understanding that, and Minister Bartlett is just a walking encyclopedia on data around that, and his Prime Minister Holness as well understands it. They all get it, basically, as do a number of other destinations on the public sector side, get it that we've got to basically make tourism work, because if we can make tourism work, our employees, our population our tax revenue, all of that benefits from it. The employment, spin-off entrepreneurial activity and all of that. So the pervasive impact of tourism on economies really cannot be lost in these discussions. If you want to recover, if you want to rebound, we've got to get the money coming in. Right now, I did an estimate yesterday. While it's too early to accurately quantify the losses, we believe it's reasonable to estimate that the Caribbean has lost over $2 billion US in earnings from tourism over the past 6 weeks, attributed to COVID-19. With a multiplier, the estimated loss, is even greater than that in revenue to governments. In tourism tax receipts with a multiplier on tax receipts could be in the range already, because we're not out of this by any means, already almost $500 million in tax revenue throughout the Caribbean as well. When we look at it, the temporary employment losses, again, is difficult to quantify, and I'm only giving some extrapolation analysis on this based on what data we do have from its impact during this time of the year, and how that extends to what the losses could be. This may translate into a multiplier loss of perhaps up to 1 million in jobs as well by the end of this second quarter. So if we do nothing as we come out of this, we don't invest in marketing and public relations to get people back, public and private sectors. If we do nothing to provide some relief and support to get people rehired, to get businesses operational, to deal with some of their cash challenges right now, with some relief from the financial institutions and utilities and so on. If we do nothing, it's going to take longer to get people back to work. It's going to take longer for the revenue to come into governments to enable them to deal with the incredible bills that they have mounting as a result of this crisis. So what's the best bet to generate revenue? We've got to find ways of bringing that export revenue, that's what tourism revenue is, back into the economies as quickly as ready, when we're ready, and as safe, as quickly as we can. If we're going to have debates about, geez, the heck with tourism, we should be just focusing. We got to be able to do both. We got to be able to focus on what the needs are locally with the population, but public and private sector in a collaborative way. We've got to find out how we recover as quickly as possible, get visitors back, get the revenue back, and that will take care of some of the other challenges.
I remember there was a British government, the DFID, the British government aid, they did a paper some years ago, and they pointed out that if you give $1 in aid, then it's going to get siphoned off for commission, expatriate fees, overseas procurement, agency fees for the various agencies, and very little of it actually trickles through, and the government civil servants get their hands on it in the country. Whereas if a tourist wanders in and puts $1 across the rum bar, that goes straight into the local economy and starts circulating right away.
Yep, the multiplier is incredible, and while we're with, I mean, a lot of people say, well, don't put all your eggs in one basket. The Caribbean needs to diversify, and yes, we do need to diversify, and we have diversified within tourism as well. But there's a great book called The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, not The Wealth of Nations. That's a different book.
I know that one, yes.
The Wealth and Poverty of Nations was written maybe about 8-10 years ago, and it basically says countries that succeed work on what their comparative advantage is. If you're in an area with rich soil, your comparative advantage is agriculture. If you have the ability with water and utility costs lower and so on, your comparative advantage with agriculture would be manufacturing as well. If you're in an area that is some of the most beautiful real estate in the world, with some of the greatest climate in the world, with some of the most incredible diverse culture, and
don't forget the rum.
Food, rum, music, everything. I mean, the Caribbean is incredible in its diversity of offerings in a very contained area. If that's your comparative advantage, you go with that.
Okay, I think we're getting towards the end. Are there any last questions before we begin to wind up?
We had a clarification on the previous question was, do you know how well equipped your members' governments are in terms of, supply, testing kits and hospital space, around that?
Yeah, I don't know that. And I think it's a great question for the Caribbean Public Health Agency. If you wanted to do another webinar, I would suggest on the Caribbean, I would suggest you pull those guys in as well. But I don't know the specifics on it. I know that there's been a lot of readiness, and they've been at it since, I think it's safe to say they've been at it since before the U.S. government was at it. Back in January, there was awareness and mobilization going on at that point. So I would venture to say that some of them have took that earnestly and are fairly well prepared, while others may have, they're just like you'll see in countries around the world, others may not be as ready. I don't know who or what. I wish I could answer that for you, but that's a good question for the Caribbean Public Health Agency.
Okay, I think that's all we've had time for. This is Ian Williams, President of the Foreign Press Association. We've been with Frank Comito from the Caribbean Hotels and Tourism Association. And we'll be coming back. We're looking for, let's say, sort of less explored aspects of this virus while people are still got cabin fever. We're exploring other subjects at the moment. Some of them are slightly morbid. There are problems with an epidemic that bring up that we are looking at. And we have other aspects of this crisis. We've looked at the economics, we've looked at the politics, and we've looked at the tourism. I look forward to a future Foreign Press Association virtual press conference on a Caribbean beach. And you're all invited as long as the host is on the beach. So this is Ian Williams, the Foreign Press Association. Please get in touch with us, foreignpressassociation.org, .com, sorry. And
.org. We're .org.
We're .org, are we? Good. Okay, I think I misled somebody today. Foreignpressassociation.org. Do look us up, do join in, do try to follow our press conferences. And if you have ideas for things that you think the press would be interested in, especially the global press, we cosmopolitan press, outside of the Beltway and outside of Albany, then do come to us with suggestions. Thank you very much, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this broadcast. To learn more about our digital forums and programs, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. For membership information, please visit www.foreignpressassociation.org and on Twitter at FPA New York. This has been an exclusive presentation of the Foreign Press Association.